My name is Cecina Alt. My English name is Gail White Eagle. I'm an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe. I have many hereditary lines to other tribes, such as the Chehalis tribe, the Quinault tribe, the Nisqually tribe, Snoqualmie tribe, Snohomish tribe. I've been weaving since 1994, which is a little over 30 years now. I began weaving after going through inpatient treatment for chemical dependency. I'm a recovering alcoholic addict. The facility that I went to is a Native American facility, and they had a lecture one day on Indian identity and what that is. At that time, I didn't have an Indian identity because I socialized mostly with drug addicts and alcoholics. So it was that day that I decided that I wanted to remain clean and sober, and I wanted to learn anything and everything I could about my heritage and my culture. My first teacher was Trudy Marcelli from the Hazel Pete family, and my mother shared with Trudy my intentions of learning how to weave. And she had brought Trudy to visit me at the treatment facility. Trudy set up a time for me to come and speak with her on Wednesday. I started going to basket classes at Trudy's. Trudy would teach me a project, say sweetgrass round necklaces, and she would go get her mom, and Hazel would come up and say, "Oh, simply beautiful. Now you have to make 10. And she would give me the materials to do that. And I would go home, I would take care of my children, take care of my home, and I would sit down and I would weave again. And I would make those 10, bring them back the next week, and they would teach me a whole new project. And every time we got done, it was the same thing. "Oh, simply beautiful. Now you got to make 10. And they would give me the materials and send me home with the materials. It wasn't until later on that I figured out that it was so I wouldn't forget. And it became my foundation for my sobriety. It became my anchor to who I am today. Those beginning teachings. Later on, I started weaving with Bruce Miller. He taught me more advanced techniques in basketry, and I also apprenticed under him in Coast Salish weaving. Susan Pavel, I learned a lot from Susan. She's kind of like my big sister in weaving. She was Bruce's first apprentice, and so she had already been weaving for a few years, and I learned from everybody. I learned techniques from everybody. I just brought a drop spindle because I want to learn how to drop spindle. Every opportunity that presents itself, every teacher that presents itself, I learn from. And you just always have to pay attention to who those teachers really are. Sometimes it's not really specifically, about weaving, but maybe something in life, maybe something you've been praying about. Maybe it just presents itself to you because you manifest it that way. I was approached by Louis Gong many years ago, and he had wanted to collaborate with 8th Generation with some of my weavings. And I had just got done hearing a story about Canasket. Canasket was one of our Muckleshoot warriors that fought for the land that we currently are in, one of our usual and accustomed areas. The villages that were in the Green River, White River, Puyallup, that area, all the warriors collaborated together to form an army to fight for our right to be human and to live the way that we wanted to live, to gather where we gathered, to fish, to hunt, to weave. We had to fight for that because for some reason, we weren't human enough for them. Canasket was one of those warriors who fought for our rights, fought for our lands. And he got separated from the other warriors during a fight, and he had to evade the army on his own. So he basically had to become ghost and try to disappear from the army. Well, he had no food whatsoever. And he harvested the only time, it's probably around this time of the year, because the only thing that you can eat that is still on the bush right now is rose hips. Of course, you might experience some side effects if you eat them fully right now, but he ate rose hips. That's what he survived on. Well, they caught up to him about Connell's Prairie area and Bonnie Lake, Buckley area, and the army people strung him up, hands tied him down, and one of the witnesses said they gutted him. They literally gutted him and murdered him, and the contents of his stomach fell out. And she said, I could clearly see rose hips in his stomach. And that's why that blanket is named Rose Hip Warrior, was to honor him and to make sure that the people know what had happened to him. So the design factors in that blanket were triangles, because have you ever seen rose hips, how they hang? The red triangles in that blanket represent the rose hips. And I used the twill design to go back and forth to represent his evasion, how he was evading the army. The Salish Sea Kit, very interesting, because as weavers and our grounding and our foundation in culture and in weaving, we were able to work together to come up with the Salish Sea Kit and to make sure that Coast Salish weaving was best represented by all factors that incorporate a weaving. So we used all the techniques that we use in Coast Salish weaving in one design on that jersey, and it was to honor our water, to make sure that the people recognize that our water is sacred and that it should be held in the highmost esteem. It brings life to everything. We need water for everything. And sharing that, and hopefully that people will recognize that we should be more careful what we're doing around our waters, what we're putting into our water, what we're taking out of our waters. Surprises come around in every weaving. If you don't get a surprise in a weaving, then you might be doing something wrong. Yes, my weaving has changed over the years. I can say that. I know this is probably going a little bit off topic, but since I was able to go to the Chicago Field Museum and being able to meet our ancestral items over there, I would say that I feel complete now. It was always like something a little bit was missing, but after meeting those garments, those blankets, everything, being able to see that they did these a long time ago and that it was like a bridge came complete. And like I feel complete with weaving now more than ever, especially ceremonial weaving. Well, traditionally, when I first started, I wove with basket materials. So sweetgrass, cedar bark, cattails. I didn't start weaving with wool until about 2003. It's so hard to tell because I'm a poor historian. I wove more with cedar bark in the beginning, and because I'm getting older, processing cedar bark isn't as easy as it used to be when I was younger, right? And it's easier for me now to just warp up the loom and weave something on the loom than it is for me to process a roll of cedar bark and weave something out of cedar. But did you see that beautiful hat in there that I wove? The cedar bark and the mountain goat wool? Putting those two things together felt like butter. Like it just went together, right? And how beautiful it turned out. It's inspiring. So many people want that hat, but it don't fit them. One thing in life that Bruce taught me was never let anybody who's done nothing tell you anything about what you're doing. And it's a big thing for me. So if you're going to critique my artwork, you better have done more than I have, or do it in a loving way. Otherwise, I might get offended. It's just really about, I know how long I've been doing this. And like, I think I would take it okay if Susan critiqued my artwork, right? So we all talk about that. You know, the other thing is, you know, Bruce used to always say, never rest on your laurels, right? And so I'm always raising that bar. I'm the one that raises the bar. And I know who I am, and I know what I do, and I know how I inspire the world and the people around me. And so you better have done more than I have. That's all I gotta say. Well, every year when I go out to harvest, I harvest materials, everything from the beginning. You know, we've got stinging nettle, we've got cedar bark, we've got sweetgrass and cattail. All of that is harvested throughout the whole year, so it's always on hand. It doesn't ever change, at least not in my home. For the most part, now we're talking about mountain goat wool, I gotta go to Susan's house, because honestly, I am no mountain climber. I literally will tell my partner, okay, you keep going, you stop and pick me up on the way down. And I'm not gonna be brave like Kelly, wherever she went, and let somebody push me up the hill. Nope, I'm just gonna be right here. So honestly, yeah, it doesn't change. The processes don't change, everything remains the same. Every day is an inspiration. I love to see people smile when they get my artwork and how it makes them feel. When I have people who want to learn and come over and want to learn how to twine a vest or to make a garment, that feeds my spirit. When I have a granddaughter that follows me around and says, Grandma, can I help you? That feeds me, inspires me to continue to go, because I remember what it was like for me in the beginning when I first started learning, what it was like to have no identity in that, to not have any culture, to not have an identity, not being able to practice. And so every person who wants to learn inspires me, and it keeps me going. I'll teach anybody that suits up and shows up. You got to suit up and show up, though. And there's a big difference between suiting up really means not dressing appropriately. It means coming ready to learn. Like not bringing your phone and looking at your phone every 2 seconds, and being ready to learn. One of the things that I tell people is, you know, I remember the first day that I went over to Bruce's and I wanted to learn, but I didn't say nothing to him. I just sat there quietly for 2 hours and watched him weave. And he finally turned around and looked at me and said, do you want to try? And I said, yes. And he traded me spots and I started to weave. And that's how that began.